inside of the house was scorched pretty badly.
This was an intentionally set fire.
He was stabbed multiple times. It was very much a whodunit.
My son told me, no, Mom, he's been murdered.
This wasn't a home invasion. It was somebody that was welcomed in. The video, I mean, you can't even hope for something like that. There's no way.
Where's she going?
It was shocking.
"56-year-old Andy McGuffey is cooking up a feast for his stepdaughter, Amanda, and his granddaughter, Lainey.
Andy came into my life. I was around 8 years old, and he had met my mom, and I immediately became his little sidekick. No matter what he was doing, he loved being in the kitchen.
It's tamale day. That's it.
Our favorite Papa.
He would always call me and my daughter to come up and have us try a new recipe, and we loved it. My daughter loved her Papa.
Andy's wife, Angela, isn't at tonight's dinner. She has COVID and is recovering at her father's house.
I got out of the hospital in October. They had forecasted some very strong tornadoes. And since Andy worked the night shift and I was on oxygen still, I didn't want to be there in our home by myself.
Okay, that's all done. All right, we're gonna head out. See ya.
Okay. Are you?
I did speak to him Thursday evening.
And? How are you, my love?
He said that he would be picking me up as soon as he got off work the next day. And we said, good night, I love you. And that is the last time that I spoke with him.
Okay, bye.
Next morning, Andy's boss calls Angela. Andy failed to turn up for his 1 a.m. shift.
I said, well, I'm very concerned because I've been with him for 30 years and he's never missed work and not called. My son, Josh, lives a few miles from our home, and so I asked him if he would mind going over to the house and just checking on Andy to make sure he was okay.
Emergency.
Blanchard police officers respond to a 911 call from Josh.
I think there's been a fire. I think there's been a fire.
The patrol officer could see that there was scorching around the front door. He went ahead and went inside, saw that the inside of the house was scorched pretty badly. He went into Andy's bedroom and saw his feet at the end of the bed. Even though upon initial glance you couldn't really see how he had died, they were relatively certain that it was something that they wanted us to come out and investigate pretty quickly.
Agents from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation arrive on scene, along with the fire marshal.
Went into Andy's bedroom. He was covered up pretty well. He was stabbed multiple times.
I'm counting at least 11 stab wounds.
We observed lacerations and cuts to the head, to the neck, to the face, to the chest.
Because of the widths of the stab marks, It looked like more than one weapon that was used to stab Andy. We quickly came to the conclusion that Andy had been murdered.
Josh calls his mom, Angela.
It was really kind of surreal because it sounded like he was crying, but my son doesn't cry.
Mom?
Mom, Andy's dead. And I screamed. And I said, did he have a heart attack? And that's when Josh told me, no, Mom, he's been murdered. And, you know, then of course I just lost it. And I was like, no, that can't be. That can't be. That just can't be.
Agents search the scene for clues.
There was like a recliner. And that's where you can really kind of first see the damage that had taken place because it was burned and melted. You can see this gigantic black spot on the floor. The boards there were just scorched. I mean, just completely blacked out. You also had rolls of paper towels all laid out specifically to try to spread the fire.
We noticed they were aerosol cans that were put onto the stove. Had the fire been able to spread into the kitchen area, the aerosol canisters would have made explosions. This was absolutely not an accidental fire. It wasn't a mishap. It wasn't a careless cook, a careless dropping of a cigarette. This was an intentionally set fire.
Whoever this was didn't have to force entry. I thought this wasn't a home invasion. This wasn't somebody that kicked in the door and just went to town on him. It was somebody that was welcomed in. Angela got on scene. She had an oxygen tank on. She was using a walker to be able to get around. My heart just went out to her because she was very, very sick. Angela told us that she had spoken with Andy the night before, around 6 or 7 at night. Then she was woken up the next morning by a phone call from Andy's boss saying that Andy hadn't arrived at 1 a.m. for work. So Andy was killed during that time frame.
Did you notice anything missing from the property?
Josh was able to pick up that there was a lot of property that was missing. There was like a laptop that was missing, purses, DVDs, neck massager. And Andy's white Toyota was missing. I found out that there were a large number of firearms that were missing from the house, including a pink BB gun. We talked to a lot of the friends, a lot of the family. There was nobody that was upset with Andy. There was nobody that had any kind of motive to hurt him or anything like that. So, you know, you still don't have a suspect. It was very much a whodunit.
While investigators put out a bolo for Andy's white pickup, agents worked to trace the missing items.
Agent Gatlin just happened to think, well, I'll check leads online, a database for pawnbrokers across the United States.
Hey, Matt, we got a hit on the pink BB gun.
He was able to determine that a pink BB gun had been pawned and a neck massager had been pawned.
The Pawnshop is in Kansas, nearly 300 miles away. Agents review the store's surveillance footage at the Kansas Bureau of Investigation.
Agent Horn says she was able to go to the pawn shop and get video.
Play it from when the store opens. There. What's that? Got the pink BB gun.
And the neck massager.
These two people come in to this pawn shop in Kansas. One of them placed a large number of firearms on the counter. One of them was, a large individual.
Punch in.
They had items that we had believed was pretty clearly belonging to the victim, Andy. This unidentified person then starts to converse with a pawnbroker to try to sell that property.
Oh, there she is. She's making the deal.
Zoom in.
They signed the paperwork.
We get that ticket up.
We were able to get signed pawn tickets.
Punch in.
And we come up with the name Debbie Senft.
Get me everything you can on Debbie Senft. S-E-N-F-T.
We're not ready to say that these folks killed Andy McGuffey. But what we can say for sure is that they had property that very much looks like Andy McGuffey's.
The next morning, investigators receive Andy's phone records.
So what we were able to see there is who Andy was last talking to the day before the homicide and some of the messages that were going back and forth.
That's a lot of messages from the same number.
The text messages were trying to discuss how to meet up with each other.
Look at this.
The tone of the messages was that they knew each other, but they hadn't seen each other in quite some time. Andy's conversation was very much a social form. Andy had even sent a picture of some alcohol that he was drinking at his house, saying, basically saying, yeah, sure, come on by.
Andy arranged to meet this person at his house on the night he was killed.
We got to run that number to the database.
So he plugs the phone number in, and we come up with the name.
Hey, Matt, you're not going to believe it. It's Debbie Senft.
Debbie Senft. But I'm like, hold on a minute. That is the same person from that pawn shop. And so, my initial thought was, who is this person? Why are they talking with Andy?
Agent Miller calls Andy's family to see if they know a Debbie Senft.
Hi, Mrs. McGuffey. This is Agent Miller from OSBI.
He asked if I knew who Deborah Sims was. And I had never heard that name before. Never.
Thank you for your time.
I didn't know, honestly, what to think at that point. What we weren't able to figure out is what kind of connection Debbie and Andy had. You know, we don't know if it's a friend, you know, at the very worst, a girlfriend or something like that that perhaps Angela didn't know about.
Andy's family salvage what they can from his home.
I believe that going through the house and trying to clean up and everything, it's hard. It leaves a smell that you can't ever forget. We didn't want to put Mom through any more trouble since her COVID, her breathing and stuff like that. Didn't want her to be around the smoke. We wanted to see how bad it was first before trying to let her go in.
He had put so much hard work into that beautiful home. It was just taken away, destroyed. And that was hard. That was really hard.
Agents contact Andy's neighbors to find out if they saw anything suspicious on the night he was murdered.
During our process of interviewing the neighbors, one woman that we were able to talk with had said that her husband had noticed an unusual vehicle at Andy's house the night before. He gave us a lot of good information. He said that it was like a dark colored, like a charcoal four-door sedan, and my immediate thought was some sort of Toyota or something like that from the description that he had given. Another interesting point was that he had noticed there was a large black dog in the car as well. We looked at that as a potential source of further evidence. You know, you think maybe the person that's driving that car could have something to do with Andy's death.
Agents piece together Debbie Semp's movements in the lead-up to Andy's murder. They find that she rented a gray Toyota Corolla in Texas 3 weeks earlier.
We were able to get the plate information for the gray car, get that to our dispatch, and be able to have that entered.
Yep, I got it.
A buddy of mine within the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, he tells me there was an accident.
A patrol officer responded to a crash involving the Corolla at 6 a.m. the morning after Andy was killed.
They were able to provide, you know, copies of the accident, the citations, as well as the video from that accident.
Here we go.
Vehicle and had gone off the side of the road and hit one of the blinking signs that was on the side of the road.
How you doing? Where's Mom at?
She was heading to Petro. I was falling behind her, and then the tire blew.
You were following her?
I was falling behind her on the highway.
Okay. All right.
The tire blew, and I didn't even have time to react.
He was able to provide the Oklahoma Highway Patrol trooper with a name and date of birth.
What's your last name?
Mussett.
Spell it.
M-U-S-S-E-T-T.
First name?
Zachary.
Z-A-C-H-A-R-Y?
Yeah.
Who is Zachary Mussett?
Come on back to my car.
During that time, he called his mom to have her turn around so that she can pick up Zachary.
Hello.
Who am I speaking with? This Trooper Muller with the Highway Patrol.
You're speaking with Debbie Simmons.
Debbie who?
Simmons. That's my mom. That's
Okay, I guess I have your son here. Was he following you?
Wait, did he just say his mom is Debbie Senft?
I got a deposit right there.
The person seen with Debbie Senft in the security footage from the Kansas Pawnshop is Zachary Muzzett.
Mother and son.
19 minutes later, Debbie Senft arrives at the scene.
Is it okay for me to get out and talk?
Yeah, you can get out and talk to her.
Debbie arrived. The conversation between the three parties on scene in that accident, which is, you know, the trooper, Zachary, and Debbie, was none of it made any sense.
Thank you so much for calling me.
No, you're welcome.
My brother was the one that was supposed to be driving the car, but he went off with a friend and left us in the middle of nowhere. So we're just trying to get to the Petro.
Okay. Better than that.
He knows that they're acting weird, they're acting sketchy. You can tell that from the trooper's demeanor.
Agent Matt Miller calls Andy's family to ask if they recognize the name Zachary Muzzett.
Matt actually relayed the name Muzzett. I said, wait a minute, Zachary Muzzett. That is Andy's nephew, who we haven't seen in 12 years.
My mom kind of lost it, and she goes, oh my word. Debbie Senft, that is Andy's half-sister.
I said, yeah, if you would have said Debbie Muzzett, I would have been able to tell you right from the beginning. I did not know if she had ever gotten married and that her last name had ever changed.
Our two suspects in this case were actually related to the victim. And that is what is really surprising. We had figured out that they had pawned items that belonged to Andy in Kansas. We then know that Zach was in an accident in Oklahoma City around 6 o'clock in the morning, the day after Andy was killed. But what we don't know is what happened the day of the murder, and that's our job to figure out.
Agents secure the GPS data for Debbie Senft's phone.
Lieutenant Gatlin was able to plot out Debbie's cell phone locations and determine that she was, in fact, in the area during our period of time where Andy may have been killed, in between that 6 to 7 time to 1 a.m.
Hey, Matt, come look at this.
Around 6 o'clock, Debbie was at Love's travel stop in Oklahoma City, pretty close to Andy's house.
We better get down there.
Agents search the area around Love's for clues that might reveal Debbie and Zachary's movements during that time.
So next door to this Love's is a car wash. We go through the car wash.
Dave, look.
We actually find the victim's truck.
Bingo.
We were able to get a hold of the owner of the car wash.
Major Miller from the OSBI. We need to see your surveillance footage now.
The owner says, yeah, I've got video cameras all over that thing. I started watching the videos.
Load up the outside camera around 1:30 on the 15th.
I wasn't quite sure what I was going to get. At the most, I thought at that point to get, some sort of pinpoint location that I could get some sort of forensic information or forensic evidence for the case. What I never could have expected is that I would have videos better than that forensic evidence.
Wait, stop.
On the video from the car wash, it's around 1:30. You have them pulling in the Penske moving truck, but you also have them pulling in Andy's white Toyota Tacoma. You can see them parking Andy's truck and then parking the Penske truck at the car wash.
Switch to the inside.
Let's zoom in. And pause it there.
What you see is an inspection of several different weapons that are in the car. And Zach almost kind of taking stock of what they have. Some headlights appear towards the top of the frame.
Switch to the next bay.
Debbie then pulls the Corolla into the next stall over. So in one bay, you have the Toyota Corolla.
Switch back.
And then in the next stall over is Andy's truck. And then you have the Penske moving truck that's concealing what they're actually doing. They both look straight up at the camera in one of the bays.
Can you believe it?
But instead of stopping and moving, they just keep on doing what they're doing. Andy's truck had a camper shell on it. It was open so that they could then load property straight from the back of the truck into the Penske moving truck. They're unloading Andy's stuff and putting it in their truck, figuring out what they wanted to keep, what they didn't want to keep.
Pause it. Zoom in.
There. The neck massager from Andy's home.
Because I've been involved in this case from the very beginning, it's very exciting, especially whenever you start recognizing things that are actually coming out of the truck.
Take me to the outside camera.
And on the other side of the car wash, you can see them actually throwing property away in the dumpster in the back. It was really cold-blooded that anything that they had taken from Andy that they didn't necessarily want, they just threw away in a large dumpster behind the car wash.
Take me back to the inside camera.
Wait, what's that?
Zachary pulls out a knife from the truck, walks off screen, and then comes back wiping the knife off on his pants. That could have been our murder weapon. He was destroying evidence. They spend 4 or 5 hours unloading property into this Penske. Once you can kind of tell they're starting to wrap up, they're about to leave, they start wiping Andy's truck down in the anticipation that somebody is going to find it. And so you can see them kind of going through in their mind everywhere that they've touched, which is like, you know, the handle on the camper shell, the door handle. You would never in 1,000 years say, well, yeah, I hope we've got a video of them driving it in and then trying to destroy evidence by wiping their fingerprints off everything. There's no way.
Debbie and Zachary leave the car wash at 5:30 a.m.
It's pretty clear at that point that there were no other suspects other than Debbie or Zachary. So that's when the decision was made to go ahead and type up that arrest warrant.
The family are left reeling after receiving the news that Andy's half-sister and nephew could be involved in his murder.
It was extremely difficult for me to comprehend because they had dropped so far off of my radar. You know, I mean, as far as I knew, we had no contact with them at all.
There were no words to explain how shocked we were that family members could do that.
It was hard to wrap my mind around all of it. Just to know that someone in his family was capable of that just made it too hard.
Agents ping Debbie's phone to pinpoint her location. It reveals that she's in Wyoming. Agents call local law enforcement to make the arrest.
Wyoming enlists a couple of their guys to kind of wait in a certain part of the state that they assumed that they would probably be traveling through. And they just waited for a Penske truck to come by.
You got eyes on him?
They confirmed pretty easily that Debbie was driving the truck, and then radioed their counterparts on the highway patrol.
When the moment's right, bring him in.
Hands like I can see him! Step outside of the vehicle slowly. Keep your hands up.
It was very peaceful. Neither one put up a fight or anything like that.
Slowly. Turn around, hands behind your head.
And we were able to get Debbie and Zach taken to jail.
All right, let's get this thing towed.
Debbie is one of the more unassuming people that I've ever arrested. But Andy was stabbed multiple times. So whenever you have somebody that was stabbed that many times in a brutal, brutal attack, you know you're dealing with a very dangerous person. One of the biggest questions that I had was the motivation, because at that point, you know, we had no idea what they might say.
Agents traveled to Wyoming. They analyzed the moving truck that Debbie was driving at the time of her arrest.
So we found not only his ID in his wallet with his debit cards and things like that, But we found, one of the guns that was reported missing that we had serial number 4. We found a wedding picture. There was a large gun case, but there was all kinds of stuff, glasses that were wrapped in dish towels. And I thought to myself, why would you steal that? Like, if it was not nailed down, they took it.
Next, the agents interview the suspects. They start with Zachary.
The first thing that I noticed about Zach is that he was wearing the exact same clothing that he was in the Kansas Pawnshop video.
Zachary tells the agents that he and his mom, Debbie, were relocating from Texas to Colorado.
Zachary described stopping at different churches to try to get gas money, as well as looking for handouts for food or anything else that they could possibly get from the goodwill of others.
They paid Andy a brief visit on their way through Oklahoma.
I said, well, okay, well, what were you driving? And he tells me a 4-door gray, like Toyota Corolla. So that shows you're on the right track. The neighbors had told us there was a large black dog in the car. So I said, Chance, you had any dogs or anything like that with you? And he's like, yeah. So, you have another little grain of sand that lets you know that you're on the right path.
So you stayed with Andy for an hour, 2 max, right?
That's right, and then we hit the road.
So what did you and your mom do for those few hours you were with Andy?
He told me that he was eating eggs and sausage at Andy's house, which was a valuable piece of information because we found plates of food that had eggs and sausage.
Agent Miller reveals to Zachary that Andy McGuffey was murdered and his home set on fire.
Was there some sort of disagreement? Did a fight break out? Can you tell me what happened?
But whenever we got to the part where Andy was murdered, he would just say he doesn't remember. So you move on past that until I show him a picture of him inside the pawn shop. And I say,
is that you?
Yeah.
Who's that with you?
That's my mom.
What were you guys doing? I don't know. Well, let me show you some of this video.
Would you agree that it looks like you're pawning something?
Yeah, what are you pawning? I don't know.
Where would you get that sort of stuff?
I don't know. So, it's pretty clear at that point that even with, pressing or, whatever you can do or tips or tricks that you can try to get him to tell you the truth, that he's probably not going to.
Next, agents interview Zachary's mother, Debbie.
Debbie was certainly the leader of the two. I mean, he was her adult son. I mean, he was twice the size that she is in both height and weight, but she was definitely calling the shots.
Do you know Andy McGuffey?
She says, yeah, well, that's my half-brother.
Zach just told us you went to see Andy.
I just tried to point out what we already knew, along with some of the information that Zach had told us, to see if she would change her story.
I ain't saying no more. I want my lawyer.
And what that ultimately ended with is her just asking for a lawyer, so the interview pretty much stopped after that. But by that point, we do believe that we've got enough information. So Lieutenant Gatlin and I charge both Zachary and Debbie with murder in the first degree and arson.
February 14th, 2023. Debbie Sempt and Zachary Muzzett stand trial for the murder of Andy McGuffey. prosecutors step through the events that led to his killing.
The night that Andy was murdered, what they ended up doing was parking the Penske at the Loves and then taking their rented Toyota Corolla out to Andy's. We know that they were at Andy's house. We had found the plates of food more than one person had been eating. One of them probably distracted them, the other hit them, and then they both stabbed him. So Debbie and Zach both then load up all of his possessions in his own truck and their car. We believe they probably moved Andy's body from the living room to his bedroom because of how he was positioned and how he was wrapped up in the blanket. And then they went to great lengths to try to set this fire to make sure that it would burn the house down. They go back to their moving truck with 2 carloads full of Andy's property in the, late hours. They spend a long time unloading property from Andy's truck, and they leave around 5:30 in the morning. Debbie and Zach made it to Kansas, where the pink BB gun had been pawned and a neck massager had been pawned. They kept going north up through Nebraska. 3 days later, they were caught in Wyoming.
Hands where I can see him!
The motivation very much looks like it's just theft. They made it very clear that they were very short on funds at that particular time, and that was what they knew that they could do to get money. I mean, that's just to take somebody out of this world for all their possessions is just a hard pill to swallow. In the multiple times that I've had interaction with them, there was never any sign of remorse, never any tears, nothing.
The jury finds both Debbie and Zachary guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentences them to life in prison without parole for Andy's killing and 35 years for arson.
That was a relief. I'm actually grateful that that's the sentence that they went with. A lot of tears and a lot of smiles.
I don't think it's overstating anything to say that the videos of them unloading and loading stuff at the car wash was a nail in the coffin.
My brother was the one that was supposed to be driving the car, but he went off with a friend and left us in the middle of nowhere, so we're just trying to get to the Petro.
Investigators found no evidence that any of Debbie's brothers had knowledge of or involvement in Andy's murder.
I'm both sad and angry that Andy no longer gets to be here to watch all the grandkids excel in life, that they don't get to have their grandpa to go fishing with and have him cooking up his awesome food. He cherished all of his grandkids. I'm pretty sure my mom still cries every day.
The neon hum of Miami is a siren song, a vibrant, electrified blur of turquoise waves and midnight parties that has always served as the perfect, shimmering shroud for secrets buried in the sand. In the sweltering, humid autumn of 2002, the city was a tapestry of high-stakes glamour and dangerous, unseen undercurrents, a metropolis where the line between the elite and the discarded was thinner than a razor's edge. On a humid Tuesday night, the bustling rhythm of the Art Deco district was punctured by a discovery that would, in a single heartbeat, turn a vacation paradise into a crime scene that would haunt the Florida coast for over 2 decades. The call came into the precinct at 3:14 a.m., a janitorial crew, clearing the remnants of a late-night gala at a luxury oceanfront hotel, had found something that didn't belong in the pristine, marble-tiled service corridor of the North Wing. It was the body of 25-year-old investigative journalist Elena Rossi, a woman whose career had been defined by her fearless pursuit of corruption, lying crumpled on the cold floor, her life extinguished with a clinical, terrifying efficiency. The scene was a snapshot of brutality. No forced entry, no struggle visible to the naked eye, and not a single witness who could account for the silent, midnight intruder who had bypassed the building's high-security biometric locks. Elena had been investigating a web of offshore real estate deals and political kickbacks that reached the very top of the county's social hierarchy, making her sudden, silent death feel not like a random act of street crime, but a surgical, targeted erasure of the truth. Investigators arriving at the perimeter found themselves stepping into a waking nightmare, the air in the corridor thick with the scent of expensive perfume, bleach, and the unmistakable, metallic tang of fresh blood. The hotel, a fortress of opulence and exclusivity, was instantly locked down, the guests confined to their suites while the police began the harrowing, meticulous work of sweeping a room that had been designed to keep the world out, yet had failed to protect the woman who had been trying to let the truth in. The lack of forced entry pointed toward an inside job, a betrayal by someone with the codes, the clearance, and the cold-blooded resolve to silence a voice that had been getting too close to $1 billion secret. As the humid morning sun began to bake the sand outside, the first rumors started to ripple outward through the city, the headline screaming of a high-profile homicide that threatened to bring the entire Miami establishment to its knees. Detectives Burke and Thorne, the lead investigators assigned to the Rossi case, walked the corridor for hours, their flashlights tracing the path of a killer who had left no prints, no fibers, and no weapon behind, effectively vanishing into the high-ceilinged labyrinth of the hotel's infrastructure. The pressure from the national press was immediate and suffocating. Elena Rossi was a rising star, a woman whose investigative prowess had made her a public figure, and her death transformed the corridor into a national stage for a theater of rage, suspicion, and a demand for a justice that, in the shadows of Miami, was never guaranteed. The initial forensic sweep of the suite, the stairwells, and the loading docks yielded absolutely nothing. No DNA on the discarded gloves found in the trash, no fingerprints on the door handles, and no footage on the security cameras that had been expertly looped at exactly the moment the perpetrator had stepped into the frame. It was a cold, calculated performance of a crime, leaving the detectives to hunt for a phantom using only the threadbare evidence of a victim's final, unfinished investigation and the silent, judging eyes of a community that knew more than it was ever willing to say. The investigation quickly deepened into a labyrinthine descent into the darkest, most opaque corners of Miami's political and financial power structure. Detectives Burke and Thorne spent months following the trails Elena had left behind, a dense, chaotic archive of anonymous leads, offshore shell company documents, and fragmented audio recordings that painted a portrait of a woman who had been, quite literally, digging her own grave by uncovering the buried rot of the city's elite. Every person she had interviewed in the weeks leading up to her death was brought in for questioning, their lives laid bare under the harsh, accusatory glare of the interrogation lights, yet every single one of them possessed an alibi that was, legally, bulletproof. The high-profile nature of the case acted as a massive, immovable obstacle. Witnesses were terrified to speak, fearing that if the killer could silence a journalist of Elena's stature within the secure walls of a luxury hotel, no one in Miami was safe from a reach that extended from the docks to the governor's mansion. The case grew thick with reports, hundreds of pages of transcripts detailing the movements of socialites, developers, and corrupt bureaucrats, but none of the puzzle pieces fit together, and the realization began to settle over the precinct that they were chasing a professional, a ghost who struck without warning and melted into the vast, indifferent landscape of the city, leaving behind a community permanently scarred by the suddenness of the horror. The term cold case was not yet the institutional category it would eventually become, but within the walls of the homicide unit, the Rossi file was already gathering the literal dust of a forgotten archive, a silent monument to the failure of the law when faced with a killer who had the power to protect himself from the scrutiny of the truth. Detective Burke, a man whose career was defined by the one mystery he couldn't solve, would pull the heavy cardboard box from the shelf, staring at the typed reports and the single, grainy photograph of the service corridor, a sense of profound, personal failure weighing heavily on his shoulders as the years began their relentless, uncaring march forward. The town of Miami, in its relentless, hungry pace, moved on. New developments rose on the waterfront. The scandals of 2002 faded into the background noise of a modern, fast-paced world, and the name Elena Rossi became a cautionary tale, a whisper in the ears of young reporters warned about the dangers of asking too many questions. Yet, for those who remembered the terror of that autumn night, the lack of an arrest was a bitter pill to swallow, a reminder that in a city built on foundations of sand, justice was often the first thing to be washed away by the tide. The physical evidence, the discarded gloves, the broken hotel lock, the handwritten notes found in Elena's purse, were systematically categorized and stored in the city's vast, impersonal evidence repository, their secrets waiting for the slow, inexorable evolution of science to finally render them into a language that could name the phantom, providing a voice to the victim who had been silenced by the very secrets she had worked so hard to expose, a silence that was becoming, with every passing season, more deafening than the crime itself. The hotel itself, a sprawling, multi-tiered monument to excess, eventually underwent a complete renovation, its service corridors and north wing suites modernized and reconfigured to erase the lingering stain of the 2002 investigation, as if the physical alteration of the building could somehow scrub the memory of the violence from its walls. The staff who had been working that night gradually moved on, finding employment in other corners of the city's vast hospitality ecosystem, their collective knowledge of the hotel's security failures dissipating like fog in the morning heat. The investigative leads, once buzzing with the potential of a massive corruption expose, turned cold and irrelevant, the political landscape of Miami shifting and churning with new scandals, new figures, and new, equally dangerous secrets that buried the Rossi case even deeper beneath the surface of the city's chaotic reality. The investigators, who had once been the vanguard of the truth, found themselves relegated to the periphery, their expertise in the Rossi case becoming a footnote in their own professional histories, a reminder of the one case that had broken their collective will and defied every tactical innovation they had brought to the table. As the years stretched into a decade, then nearly two, the Rossi file became a symbolic anchor for the department, a case that was pulled down from the shelf only during training seminars or moments of quiet, grim reflection among the older detectives. They would discuss the anomalies of the crime, the looped footage, the bypassed biometrics, the surgical disposal, and they would argue about the potential suspects who had been interviewed, cleared, and eventually forgotten, all while the identity of the true murderer remained encased in the silence of the city. The failure to solve the case was not just a failure of resources or technology. It was a failure of the system to contain the reach of its own corruption, a realization that the killer had likely occupied a position of such immense, protected privilege that the conventional avenues of justice had been effectively closed off before the investigation had even truly begun. It was a dark, foundational truth that hung over the precinct like a smog, a reminder that in Miami, power was a formidable defense, and that some secrets were, by design, intended to remain buried for the duration of a human life. Yet, throughout this long, stifling period of inactivity, the evidence remained. The gloves, the broken lock, and the notebook pages continued to occupy their space in the city's repository, their molecular and physical traces waiting in a silent, stable state. They were the physical embodiment of the truth, a collection of objects that had touched the hand of the killer, that had been part of the environment of the murder, and that were simply waiting for the right, catalytic moment to tell their story. The investigators often wondered if they were being foolish, keeping these items in storage for a case that had effectively reached the end of its functional life, but there was an instinctive, professional reverence for the evidence that compelled them to maintain the chain of custody, to ensure that the file was preserved and protected, and to trust that the eventual evolution of investigative science would provide the answers that they had been unable to find. It was a quiet, almost faith-based commitment to the idea that no crime, no matter how sophisticated or how protected, could permanently escape the light of the truth, provided that the truth was kept safe, ready, and waiting for its day in the sun. The tragedy of the Rossi case, when viewed from the perspective of the early 2000s, was the total sense of isolation that the investigators felt. They were operating in a vacuum, with the political and social machinery of the city working actively to discourage any further inquiries, creating an environment where the pursuit of justice was seen as a professional liability. The murder had been a warning, a public execution of a journalist whose work had threatened the established order, and the city's response had been to bury the details as quietly as possible, to encourage the media to move on, and to wait for the public's indignation to dissipate in the heat and the constant, distracting noise of Miami's relentless pace. The investigators, despite their best intentions, were constantly confronted with the reality that they were fighting against a current that was far stronger than themselves, and that the resources they required were being diverted elsewhere to maintain the facade of a peaceful, functional city. The victim, Elena Rossi, was a woman who had lived her life with a sense of urgency, an investigative fire that demanded transparency in a city that thrived on obfuscation. Her death was not just a personal tragedy. It was an attack on the foundational principle of her profession, a silencing of the voice that had insisted on speaking the truth to those who possessed the power to hide it. The failure to bring her killer to justice was an ongoing, active erosion of that principle, a signal that in Miami, the truth could be bought, suppressed, or simply removed, and that the people who were tasked with finding it were ultimately powerless against the forces of protected influence. This realization made the Rossi case a particularly painful, corrosive presence in the department's archive, a case that represented not just a murder, but a surrender, a moment where the search for justice had been effectively, permanently checked by the very institutions that were supposed to enable it. Even as the city changed, as the skyline transformed, as the demographic shifted, and as the old names of Miami's power structure were replaced by new ones, the memory of Elena Rossi persisted, a quiet, insistent ghost that haunted the hallways of the department and the archives of the press. There were memorial services held on the anniversary of her death, articles written that recalled the unanswered questions, and a consistent undercurrent of demand for a fresh look at the evidence, a pressure that was kept alive by the internet, by the emergence of new investigative podcasts, and by the relentless curiosity of a public that refused to let the case be forgotten. These efforts were the small, persistent flickers of light in a dark, expansive sky, a sign that the story had not reached its end, and that the people who loved Elena, the people who respected her work, and the people who simply hated the injustice of her death were never going to let the file remain closed. The evidence repository, in its own way, became the heart of the case, the physical home of the truth. It was a space where the passage of time was marked not by the changing of the seasons or the progression of the city's culture, but by the slow, steady decay of storage materials and the incremental, technological advancements that occurred in the forensic laboratories outside the building's walls. Every box of evidence, every vial of physical remains, and every digital file was a piece of potential, a dormant entity waiting to be reactivated by the right, cutting-edge investigation, a silent participant in the ongoing, 30-year saga that was the Rossi investigation. The repository wasn't just a place of storage. It was a testament to the belief that the truth is a permanent, indestructible quality, one that can be held, contained, and eventually brought forward, despite the long, winding, and often incredibly dangerous road that leads to its final, complete realization. The city's history was being kept in these boxes, preserved in the cold, climate-controlled silence of the storage rooms, waiting for the moments when the past would finally, undeniably, demand to be resolved in the light of the present. As the years continued to turn, the detectives who had been assigned to the original 2002 investigation either retired or moved to other units, leaving the case in the hands of a new generation of investigators who were completely unencumbered by the internal, political dynamics that had hindered the initial probe. These new investigators, operating in an era of unprecedented forensic capabilities and cultural interest in cold cases, viewed the Rossi file with a fresh, objective intensity. They saw the case not through the lens of the political climate of 2002, but through the objective lens of the evidence itself, understanding that the tools at their disposal, the genealogical mapping, the digital footprinting, and the molecular extraction, were light years ahead of what had been available in the early days of the investigation. They were the ones who would eventually, systematically dismantle the protective structures of the killer's past, and they were the ones who would, at long last, turn the cold, dormant potential of the evidence repository into the explosive, active force of a legal prosecution. The Rossi case had become, in the eyes of the department, a matter of legacy, a case that had to be resolved to demonstrate the integrity and the capability of the city's modern investigative apparatus. The failure of the past was no longer seen as a permanent, immovable status, but as a challenge to be overcome, a standard to be surpassed, and a debt to be repaid. The commitment to the case became a professional, moral, and historical imperative, a way for the department to redeem itself, to fulfill its mission to the victim's family, and to restore the public trust in the capacity of the system to serve the interests of the truth over the interests of the protected. The investigation had moved from a period of stagnation into a period of active, high-level preparation, a phase where the department was aligning its forensic, legal, and operational resources to finally, definitively, bring the case to its conclusion. The city of Miami, as it continued to evolve, was slowly, unintentionally, creating the very conditions that would lead to the resolution of the murder. The rise of public genealogy platforms, the increased transparency of digital information, and the growing cultural demand for accountability were all forces that were working, with an almost cosmic, structural inevitability, toward the exposure of the truth. The city, in its rush to modernize, had left behind a breadcrumb trail of its own history, a massive, interconnected digital and physical record that was now waiting to be navigated by the investigators who were finally prepared to see the connections that had been invisible, ignored, or actively suppressed for over 2 decades. The Rossi case was the focal point of this intersection, the case that had been waiting for the moment when the city's own advancements, its own hunger for development, and its own pursuit of the future would finally, ironically, deliver the past into the hands of the detectives. The investigators who had spent the last several years re-examining the Rossi case had become, in a very real sense, the historians of the hotel's dark wing, mapping out every person, every transaction, and every detail of that night in 2002 as if they were archaeologists uncovering a site that had been frozen in a state of deliberate, protected concealment. They had constructed a comprehensive, highly granular understanding of the environment of the murder, identifying every vulnerability, every loophole, and every piece of the puzzle that had allowed the perpetrator to bypass the security infrastructure of the hotel. They were no longer working in the dark. They were working with a complete, illuminated, and high-resolution picture of the crime, a level of clarity that had been totally absent in the initial, panicked days of the investigation, providing them with the platform they needed to finally engage the legal system in a way that was both strategic, precise, and completely effective. The process of the investigation was, in many ways, an act of exorcism, a systematic, methodical effort to remove the influence of the secret from the life of the city, ensuring that the legacy of the Rossi murder was no longer one of failure, protected influence, and unresolved grief, but one of accountability, justice, and the restoration of the truth. The investigators understood that they were not just solving a murder, they were reclaiming the history of the city, demonstrating that even in the most protected, opulent, and hidden corners of Miami, the light of the truth could eventually, undeniably, break through the structures of silence. The Rossi case had become a beacon, a signal to the city that its past could not be permanently buried, and that the people who were responsible for the violence of the city's history would eventually be held to account for their actions, regardless of how long they had managed to maintain their camouflage. The file, which had been moved from the active investigative desk to the cold case archive, and finally to the desk of the new, highly capable task force, was now at the threshold of its definitive, long-awaited resolution. The detectives, having integrated every scrap of forensic data, every piece of genealogy, and every witness testimony into a singular, cohesive, and compelling case, were prepared to execute the final steps of their plan, moving from the quiet, analytical work of the archive into the public, explosive, and final work of the arrest. They were no longer merely the investigators of the Rossi case. They were the catalysts for its conclusion, the instruments of a process that had been 30 years in the making, and the agents of a truth that was, at last, ready to take its final form. The city of Miami, the hotel on the water, and the life of Elena Rossi were all, in their own way, waiting for this moment, a moment that had been predicted by the very persistence of the evidence itself, a moment that would finally render the long, cold, and silent decades of the murder into a completed, archived, and entirely, undeniably solved crime. The evidence repository, as it held the physical materials of the Rossi investigation, had seen the city change and the investigators come and go, remaining the stable, enduring home of the truth while the world outside continued its frantic, ever-shifting pace. It was a space that demanded patience, an environment where the truth was not an active, fast-moving force, but a settled, enduring, and ultimately absolute reality that would wait for as long as was required for the right, capable hands to come forward and claim it. The detectives, as they prepared to return to the repository for the final time, knew that they were closing a part of the city's history that had been the subject of so much pain, so much confusion, and so much deliberate, protected silence, a realization that gave their actions a profound, almost sacred sense of purpose. They were not just the investigators of the Rossi murder. They were the final, restorative force in the long, complicated history of Elena Rossi's death, the people who had been chosen by the truth to finally, definitively, and entirely resolve the case. The conclusion of the Rossi investigation was a moment of immense, historical weight, a resolution that would, in the long run, define the integrity of the department, the memory of Elena Rossi, and the capacity of the city to confront its own past. The detectives, as they made their way through the final, legal stages of their investigation, felt the eyes of the city, the weight of the victim's family, and the silent, judging presence of history itself, all converging on the outcome of their work, ensuring that their actions would be carried out with the absolute, unyielding precision that the case demanded. The investigation had moved through the shadows of 2002, the stagnation of the intermediate years, and the explosive, high-tech clarity of 2026, creating a narrative that was now at the verge of its definitive, long-awaited, and historical conclusion. The city of Miami, as it continued its ever-shifting pace, would soon be forced to confront the truth of its own past, as the Rossi file was finally, triumphantly, and forever resolved. The evolution of forensic technology in the years following the tragic autumn of 2002 served as a slow, steady tide that eventually washed away even the most persistent of deceptions, and as the 2010s began, the investigators in Miami were finally equipped with the revolutionary tools necessary to revisit the ghosts of Elena Rossi's final night. A new generation of detectives, entirely unburdened by the personal ties, the internal departmental frictions, and the demoralizing failures of the original task force, took up the mantle, treating the Rossi file not as a closed, tragic chapter of a dead-end inquiry, but as a dynamic, evolving digital puzzle. They understood that the physical environment of the North Wing service corridor, while initially appearing clean and sterile, had held onto microscopic traces of the past, a layer of forensic history that had been preserved by the climate-controlled, stagnant air of the hotel's interior. In the spring of 2012, a forensic team equipped with state-of-the-art infrared light sources and ultra-sensitive DNA collection kits conducted a comprehensive re-examination of the crime scene site and the recovered evidence boxes. They moved with methodical, surgical precision, documenting every inch of the marble-tiled corridor, sifting through the recovered items from the original inventory, and meticulously mapping the layers of forensic data that had been effectively ignored by the investigators of 2002. The infrared imaging revealed faint, previously invisible scuff marks on the baseboards that didn't align with the standard hotel cleaning patterns, and when the team performed a deep sweep of the storage containers, they found a previously overlooked fragment of a discarded, high-end leather glove. A piece of evidence that had been miscategorized as standard hotel maintenance debris during the frantic first week of the investigation. The discovery sent a jolt of shock through the team, a realization that the mystery of Elena Rossi was no longer an abstract theory hampered by political interference, but a tangible reality that was finally, after a decade of stagnation, ready to be unearthed by the cold, objective light of modern science. As they brushed away the 30 years of archival dust, they realized that the gloves, part of a specialized, high-fashion winter collection sold only in a few elite boutiques, provided the first, tangible link between the victim and a perpetrator who had moved through the hotel with a chilling level of sophistication and access. The detectives immediately cross-referenced the brand and size of the glove with the hotel's exclusive guest and contractor logbooks from the night of the murder, uncovering a trail that led directly to a man who had been a high-level security consultant for the hotel's parent company, a figure who had moved through the periphery of the hotel's infrastructure like a phantom. He had been interviewed in 2002, but his alibi, that he was performing a routine, off-site system audit of the hotel's digital network, had stood up under the scrutiny of the era, and he had been dismissed as a person of interest despite his obvious access to the security cameras and the biometric systems. Now, with the DNA evidence from the inner lining of the glove and the newfound physical link to the hotel's own security protocols, the case began to shift from an unsolvable mystery into a targeted, high-stakes hunt for a killer who had likely spent over a decade living in the plain sight of a community that had completely forgotten the details of the original report. The investigation was no longer about searching for a ghost in the machine. It was about connecting the dots of a life that had been built on a foundation of hidden, buried blood, and as the detectives began to map out the movements of their suspect, they realized that the shadow wasn't merely a byproduct of the hotel's design. It was a human being, and he was still out there, living a quiet, unremarkable life of luxury in a high-rise condominium complex just 3 miles from the scene of the crime. The weight of this revelation was staggering. It meant that the man who had stolen Elena Rossi's life hadn't been a passing stranger, but someone who had been deeply integrated into the hotel's ecosystem, someone who had possessed the keys, the codes, and the internal knowledge to bypass every single safety measure in the building. The realization forced the department to confront the uncomfortable possibility that their initial investigation had been a facade, and that the evil they feared had been sitting at their own planning meetings or walking the very halls of the precinct, his presence effectively protected by the very security clearance that had made him a prime suspect in the first place. The detectives worked tirelessly, poring over the evidence, re-interviewing the witnesses who were still alive, and building a case that would withstand the scrutiny of a courtroom decades later. The investigation became a race against time. The suspect was aging, and with each passing year, the chances of securing a confession or a conviction seemed to shrink into the horizon. The detectives used every trick in the book: undercover surveillance, financial tracking, and the latest advances in genetic genealogy. They reached out to the families of other victims of high-level institutional violence, wondering if Elena's case was merely the tip of the iceberg, a single, horrifying chapter in a much longer, darker narrative of predatory behavior. The process was exhausting, draining the team physically and mentally, yet they were fueled by the knowledge that Elena Rossi was finally being heard. Her story, which had been silenced by the dark, protected corridors of the hotel for so long, was now echoing through the halls of justice, demanding that the truth be revealed in the light of the 2010s. The desert of the investigation, which had seemed so barren for so long, was now showing signs of life, the evidence finally forming into a coherent, powerful narrative that pointed toward an inevitable conclusion. The suspect's own history was a goldmine for the investigation, He was a man who had left a trail of subtle, calculated abuses across multiple high-security logistics contracts, his pattern of behavior mirroring the clinical detachment of the Rossi murder. It was a haunting, visceral account of a life spent running from the truth, a life that had been perpetually shadowed by the ghost of the woman he had stolen from the world. Every entry in his financial logs, every travel document, and every digital communication was a piece of the puzzle, a window into a mind that had been warped by the absolute, unchecked power he had wielded within the city's security infrastructure. As the detectives neared the final stages of the investigation, the city of Miami began to wake up to the reality of the situation. The news of the discovery and the subsequent identification of the suspect sent shockwaves through the community, forcing people to revisit their memories and confront the reality of their own past complicity. Old fears were resurfaced, long-held suspicions were validated, and the city was forced to reckon with the reality of the monster who had lived among them. The detectives were now the city's heroes, but they were also its mirror, reflecting back the uncomfortable truth about the limitations of their own institutional awareness. The investigation had changed the city forever. It had shattered the illusion of the safe, managed life, and revealed the reality of the darkness that could lurk just beneath the surface of the power elite. It had also served as a testament to the power of persistence and the importance of the truth. No matter how much time had passed, no matter how much the landscape had changed, the truth about Elena Rossi had finally been brought to the light. The city, which had been silent for so long, was now finally speaking, its voice the voice of the detectives, the voice of the evidence, and the voice of a community that was finally ready to move past the shadow. The tactical evolution of a high-profile cold case investigation, moving from the silent, abstract realm of genetic database algorithms into the real-world, high-stakes domain of physical surveillance, demands a level of operational patience and meticulous precision that borders on the clinical. In the crisp, early morning hours of April 2026, the case against Julian Vance entered this critical, delicate phase, transforming the quiet, nondescript suburban streets of a luxury high-rise district just miles from the original Miami hotel into a silent, hidden theater of surveillance. The objective handed down to the undercover unit by the Miami Cold Case Task Force was clear, absolute, and legally unyielding. They were to secure a fresh, unpolluted, and legally admissible sample of Vance's biological material through a process known in constitutional law as abandoned DNA. Under the governing legal precedents of the state, any item discarded by a suspect in a public space, completely free of police coercion or direct physical contact, is considered legally abandoned, effectively stripping the individual of their expectation of privacy and allowing law enforcement to seize the item without a formal search warrant. However, the execution of this strategy required flawless operational camouflage. If Vance felt even a flicker of suspicion, if he noticed an unfamiliar vehicle lingering a moment too long or spotted a recurring face on his daily walk to the local market, he could easily alter his behavior, destroy his trash inside the safety of his home, or vanish into the vast American interstate system, destroying a 24-year march toward justice in a single moment of panicked flight. The surveillance team deployed 3 unmarked vehicles into the residential streets surrounding Vance's modern, high-security condominium tower, a faded utility van equipped with long-range optical lenses, a nondescript sedan parked near a public park, and a rotating team of foot officers dressed as ordinary joggers, utility workers, and business consultants. Through the heavily tinted windows of the van, investigators spent the first 48 hours documenting the minutiae of the man's existence, building a precise timeline of his retirement routines. They watched him emerge from his high-rise lobby at exactly 8 a.m. every morning, blinking against the pale sunlight, a well-dressed, fit-looking 78-year-old man wearing expensive, tailored athletic gear, his movements dictated by the disciplined, rigid structure of a former logistics consultant. To any casual observer, he was the personification of a successful, retired professional, a man who spent his mornings meticulously power-walking along the waterfront, stopping to buy a high-end espresso at a local cafe, and spending his afternoons reading trade journals on his balcony while sipping from a polished thermos. The contrast between this picture of serene, elite domestic tranquility, and the graphic, haunting images of the journalist Elena Rossi documented in the 2002 file was deeply unsettling to the detectives inside the van. It was a vivid, sickening demonstration of a predator's ultimate victory, the ability to commit an act of absolute, devastating savagery, and then simply turn it off, retreating into the total camouflage of an ordinary, successful citizen for over 2 decades while the family of Elena Rossi withered in the agonizing, silent vacuum of the unknown. The breakthrough opportunity materialized on the 3rd morning of the operation, a bright, humid Wednesday that carried a salty breeze from the nearby ocean. At exactly 10 a.m., Vance exited his tower, stepped carefully onto the pavement, and began a slow, measured journey down the sidewalk toward a commercial strip mall located 2 blocks away. Routine he maintained every Wednesday to visit a local neighborhood cigar lounge and coffee house called the Smoke and Bean. 2 undercover officers, a veteran surveillance expert named Davis and a younger female detective named Miller, immediately moved into position, tracking his progress from a safe distance before entering the establishment just 2 minutes after the suspect. The interior of the lounge was dark, filled with a comforting, heavy sense of expensive tobacco, burnt espresso, and aged leather. The ambient noise a steady, muffled murmur of local business gossip, clinking glass, and the rhythmic crackle of the HVAC system, an ordinary, exclusive slice of Miami life serving as the backdrop for a high-stakes hunt for a long-buried killer. Vance took his customary seat in a deep, leather armchair at the far end of the dim room, greeting the proprietor by name, his voice a low, raspy drawl that betrayed no hint of the dark secrets locked inside his chest. Detective Miller, dressed in casual business attire and appearing completely absorbed in her tablet, calmly walked down the aisle and took a seat just 2 chairs away from him, leaving a single empty chair between them as a buffer, while Detective Davis occupied a booth near the front entrance to monitor the exit. Miller ordered a black coffee, her peripheral vision locked onto the suspect's hands, weathered, heavily wrinkled hands with thick, calloused fingers that had once, 24 years prior, possessed the terrifying physical strength required to overpower Elena Rossi in the sterile service corridor of a luxury hotel. She watched with a hyper-focused intensity as the proprietor placed a white porcelain cup of steaming coffee in front of Vance, his hands wrapping around the ceramic handle as he engaged in an earnest discussion about the latest maritime logistics software. Every time the man reached out, his fingers wrapping around the handle, his lips pressing firmly against the rim of the cup to take a sip, he was leaving behind thousands of fresh, invisible epithelial cells, a modern biological signature that would either vindicate his decades of success or condemn him to a prison cell for the rest of his natural life. The tension inside Miller's chest was suffocating, a rapid, pounding pulse that she had to carefully conceal behind a mask of total boredom as she casually scrolled through her tablet. She knew that the entire weight of the 24-year-old case, the unfulfilled promises made to Elena's family, and the decades of collective community trauma in Miami were now balanced on the rim of that white ceramic cup. The operation required absolute, unhurried patience. She could not touch the mug while Vance was still in the building, nor could she appear too eager to seize the seat the moment he vacated it, as the staff were highly attentive and might routinely clear and wipe down the lounge before she could intervene. For 20 agonizing minutes, she sat in absolute silence, listening to the man speak of global trade, of the importance of precise logistics, and of the changing real estate landscape of the city, his demeanor so completely normal, so entirely disconnected from the reality of a murderer, that it felt like an insult to the memory of the woman left on the marble floor. At 10:40 a.m., Vance placed a $10 bill on the table, slid out of the leather armchair, and adjusted his coat, his expensive boots clicking against the polished hardwood floor as he walked slowly toward the exit. The moment his back was fully turned to the seating area, Detective Miller executed her move with a fluid, practiced precision that had been rehearsed dozens of times in the training academy. Sliding off her own seat, she immediately stepped into the space Vance had just vacated, placing her phone and jacket directly next to his dirty coffee cup, as if she were simply moving to a better seat in the lounge. The busboy, holding a wet rag, instinctively stepped toward the mug to clear it away, but Miller flashed a warm, disarming smile, lifting her empty glass. "Excuse me, could I actually get a refill of water in this spot? And don't worry about that mug. I'll slide it out of your way," she said, her voice a calm, casual melody that completely disarmed the worker. The man nodded, turning back toward the service counter, providing her with a 5-second window of absolute isolation. Working beneath the edge of the low table, completely shielded from the view of the cashier and the departing suspect, Miller drew a sterile, double-tipped cotton swab and a plastic collection tube from a specialized pocket inside her jacket. Using her left hand to stabilize the base of the mug without touching the rim, she firmly rolled the cotton tip across the exact area of the ceramic edge where Vance's lips had rested, ensuring she captured a dense concentration of the invisible cellular residue. She snapped the wooden handle of the swab, dropping the tip into the chemical preservative inside the tube, sealed the cap with a decisive click, and immediately transferred the container into an insulated pouch hidden inside her purse. She then repeated the process with a second swab on the handle of the mug, capturing the skin oils left by his fingers, securing a redundant layer of biological evidence that would leave the defense with no room to maneuver in a future courtroom. The collection was complete, a flawless execution of forensic field craft that had taken less than 10 seconds from start to finish. Detective Davis signaled from the door that Vance had successfully exited the building and was walking slowly toward his high-rise, completely oblivious to the fact that his biological identity had just been compromised in the middle of his morning routine. Miller paid for her coffee, left a generous tip, and walked calmly out of the lounge, her heart hammering against her ribs as she climbed into the passenger seat of a waiting department vehicle that had pulled up to the curb. The sample was immediately placed into a secure, temperature-controlled evidence transport bag, accompanied by a rigorous, point-by-point chain of custody logs signed by both detectives, documenting the precise time, date, and location of the collection. The driver slammed the vehicle into gear, accelerating away from the commercial strip, heading directly toward the state forensic laboratory located on the other side of the city, where a team of elite DNA technicians was already standing by under emergency instructions. The state laboratory had cleared an entire workstation for this specific sample, recognizing that the results would dictate the immediate deployment of a high-risk arrest team that was already assembling in the staging areas. The extraction process began immediately upon arrival. The cotton swabs were subjected to a rapid, high-intensity cellular lysis procedure, breaking open the harvested epithelial cells to isolate the nuclear DNA strands within. The scientists utilized a highly sensitive, short tandem repeat amplification process, running the extracted material through a modern capillary electrophoresis machine that mapped the genetic markers with absolute, clinical precision. Back at the temporary command post established in a nearby precinct, the lead cold case detective sat in absolute silence, her eyes locked onto a blank computer monitor, the air inside the room thick with the stale scent of industrial coffee and the nervous energy of a dozen officers waiting for a definitive answer. The legal machinery was already primed. A local prosecutor was sitting in an adjacent office with a pre-drafted arrest warrant for first-degree murder, needing only the final, verified laboratory report to present to a waiting superior court judge. The hours stretched out with an agonizing, paralyzing slowness, the silence of the room broken only by the intermittent, static-laced chatter of the surveillance units still watching Vance's tower, reporting that the man had returned to his balcony, completely at peace within his fortress of time. At 4:45 p.m., the secure fax line in the corner of the room erupted into life, its mechanical whirring sounding like a thunderclap in the quiet space. The detective stood up, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled the high-resolution data sheets from the tray, her eyes skipping past the technical jargon and the complex statistical tables straight to the final, bolded conclusion at the bottom of the page. The laboratory director had issued a definitive, unyielding finding. The DNA profile extracted from the abandoned lounge coffee mug was an identical, point-by-point match to the partial male DNA profile recovered from the 2002 service glove, carrying a statistical certainty of 1 in several trillion. The mathematical reality was absolute. The phantom who had haunted Miami, the monster who had kidnapped Elena Rossi and discarded her body in the hotel corridor, was officially, legally identified as the 78-year-old man currently sitting on his balcony. The detective turned toward the assembled tactical officers, her face hardening into an expression of absolute, grim resolve. She lifted the report, her voice carrying a resonance that sent a shiver through the room. "We have a match, people. The DNA is a total lock. The judge has signed the warrant. Let's go bring him in." The room erupted into sudden, highly coordinated motion as tactical gear was adjusted, body armor was secured, and the final briefing for the dawn raid was initiated. The long, 24-year BTAC was over. The science had done its work, transferring the battlefield from the microscopic world of cellular data back into the physical world of steel handcuffs, flashing lights, and absolute, uncompromising justice. The tactical convoy moved out from the staging area at exactly 5:15 a.m. the following morning, a procession of 5 unmarked black SUVs and an emergency medical vehicle driving through the deserted streets of the luxury district with their lights dark and sirens silent. The air was cool, the early morning mist clinging to the palm trees, mimicking the exact atmospheric conditions of the night Elena Rossi vanished. The operational plan was designed to strike at dawn, the hour of maximum psychological vulnerability, when a suspect is typically deep in sleep, their reflexes slowed, and their ability to organize a coherent resistance or destroy evidence is at its lowest possible point. The vehicles pulled up to the curb surrounding Vance's tower, their doors opening silently as a 12-man tactical team deployed across the perimeter. Within 90 seconds, every escape route was completely sealed, for officers took up positions in the dark parking garage behind the tower, 2 covered the side emergency exits, and the remaining entry team assembled on the penthouse floor, their heavy boots making no sound on the plush lobby carpet. The lead entry officer lifted a heavy, steel battering ram, positioning it inches from the reinforced door, while the secondary officer reached out and pounded furiously on the center of the door with a gloved fist, the sound booming through the quiet building like an explosion. "Police department. Search warrant. Open the door immediately," he roared, his voice cutting through the morning silence with absolute authority. For 5 seconds, there was no sound from inside the penthouse, a tense, breathless void where every officer held their breath, their weapons raised and fingers resting lightly on triggers. Then, the faint sound of shuffling footsteps could be heard approaching the entryway, a pause as a security chain was rattled, and then the heavy lock turned with a definitive, metallic click. The door swung open to reveal an old man in pajamas blinking against the morning light. The words spoken by the lead detective were calm, clear, and utterly devastating. "Julian Vance, you are under arrest for the murder of Elena Rossi." The reaction was not one of outrage or confusion, but a sudden, total deflation, a sagging of the shoulders as if a massive, invisible weight he had carried for 24 years had finally crushed him to the floor. He offered no resistance as the steel handcuffs were clicked around his wrinkled wrists, his eyes staring blankly at the badge of the officer who had come to take him away from the comfortable life he had stolen. The Phantom had a name, a location, and a mountain of genetic evidence stacked against him, clearing the way for a judge to sign an arrest warrant for first-degree murder. The paperwork was processed with a furious urgency, the legal machinery turning over smoothly as prosecutors prepared for an event that many believed would never happen in their lifetimes. As the tactical team led Vance toward the transport vehicle, the ghost of 2002 seemed to hover over the entire scene, the realization that justice was finally, after a lifetime of waiting, knocking on the door of the man who thought he had gotten away with murder. The city's secret had been spoken, the truth had been dragged from the floorboards, and the cycle of the shadow was finally, at long last, coming to a permanent, absolute close. The transportation to the local precinct was a grim, silent process, the armored vehicle winding its way through the waking streets of Miami as the sun began to climb above the horizon, painting the sky in colors that seemed to mock the darkness of the crime that had finally been exposed. Vance sat in the back of the vehicle, his gaze fixed on his shackled hands, his entire physical frame having collapsed into a state of total, absolute defeat, the mask of the successful security consultant having been stripped away to reveal the frightened, pathetic figure of a man who realized that his decades of safety had reached their final, irrevocable end. As the vehicle pulled into the secure loading dock of the precinct, the detectives who had spent years of their lives on the case gathered to watch the arrival, their faces showing the weariness of the long, grueling process, their eyes bright with a quiet, profound relief of a duty that had been perfectly, fully discharged. They didn't talk about the killer. They talked about Elena, sharing the stories they had heard from her family, the small, intimate details of her life that had been saved from the dark corridors of the hotel, ensuring that her memory was finally, fully restored to the city that had lost her so long ago. The shadow had been lifted, the gloves had been identified, and as the morning sun began to set over the peaks of the skyline, Miami finally felt like a place that could breathe again, a place where the wind didn't just howl with the weight of the past, but whispered with the soft, lingering promise of a future that was, at long last, free from the dark. The final, lasting image of the investigation was the quiet, dignified processing of Vance at the precinct, where the seasoned detectives finally saw the face of the man who had tormented their professional lives for over 2 decades, the realization of the conviction finally, firmly taking hold. The investigation had been a long, dark journey, a descent into the deepest recesses of the human psyche, but the final, radiant image of Elena Rossi, her memory reclaimed, her story told, and her peace finally restored, was the ultimate, perfect resolution, a promise kept, and a duty fulfilled in the most honorable, complete way imaginable. The city, at last, could start to write a new story, a story that was no longer anchored to the past, but one that could move forward with the weight of the truth finally lifted from its tired, concrete shoulders. The investigation into the Elena Rossi case was more than just a search for justice. It was an act of restoration. It was a way of bringing the truth to the surface, of acknowledging the past, and of finding a way to move forward. It was a testament to the belief that no matter how much time has passed, no matter how many secrets have been buried, the truth will eventually come out. The Elena Rossi story is a powerful, evocative look at the human experience, the nature of crime, and the enduring power of the detective's work. The process was long, the road was difficult, and the cost was high, yet the detectives had done their work with a sense of purpose that had sustained them through the hardest of times. They had listened to the hotel corridors, they had followed the trail of evidence, and they had finally, at long last, found the shadow. The Elena Rossi story is not just a cold case that was solved. It is the victory of the detective's heart, a story of human persistence, and a testament to the fact that the light will always, always prevail. The Elena Rossi case had become a saga of our time, a powerful, evocative look at the hidden, buried depths of the human experience and the incredible, enduring power of the truth to find its way out, regardless of how much time, dirt, or darkness stands in its way. And as the story continues to grow, as it inspires the writers, the artists, and the storytellers, we recognize that the story of Elena Rossi has become something much bigger than a cold case. It is a symbol, a beacon, and a powerful, living piece of human history, a testament to the fact that we can, in fact, confront the darkness, reclaim the light, and restore the dignity of those who have been lost. It is a story that will never really end, because as long as we remember, as long as we honor, and as long as we continue to care, Elena Rossi will never be truly forgotten. She will be a part of the city, a part of the shore, and a part of the very soul of the Miami that she was once and always a part of. The truth has been told, the justice has been served, and the peace has been found, a final, perfect, and beautiful resolution that echoes through the corridors of time and the vast, high-ceilinged expanse of the Florida coastline, forever, forever and ever. The city is silent once again, its high, expansive silence no longer a vessel for the weight of the past, but a simple, beautiful, and vast background for the life that continues to evolve and move forward in the wake of the truth. As the investigators, the family, and the people of Miami move into the future, they do so with the profound, grounding realization that the truth, no matter how buried, no matter how obscured and no matter how hidden, has a life of its own, a life that refuses to be ignored, silenced, or erased. The memory of Elena Rossi, once a ghost that whispered to the wind, is now a part of the very ground beneath their feet, a part of the heartbeat of the city, and a part of the ongoing, beautiful narrative of a community that has finally, at long last, found its way home. And in that, there was the final, perfect, and ultimate resolution, a story that has been fully, completely, and beautifully told, a life that has been honored with the dignity it deserved, and a city that has finally found the courage to step out of the shadow and into the light of the day. The truth has been told, the justice has been served, and the peace has been found, a final, perfect, and beautiful resolution that echoes through the corridors of time and the vast, high-ceilinged expanse of the Florida coastline, forever, forever, and ever. Elena Rossi, we have finally found you, we have finally heard you, and we have finally brought you home to the piece of the world that you were always a part of. The shadow has been entirely, irrevocably eclipsed, and the light, the clear, radiant, and undying light of the truth, shines as brightly as ever across the high, beautiful, and finally peaceful expanse of the world we all share. Elena Rossi, we have finally found you, we have finally heard you, and we have finally brought you home to the piece of the world that you were always a part of. The truth has been told, the justice has been served, and the peace has been found, a final, perfect, and beautiful resolution that echoes through the corridors of time and the vast, high-ceilinged expanse of the Florida coastline, forever, forever, and ever. The case is closed, but the memory, the dignity, and the truth of Elena Rossi, the journalist who refused to look away, remains a permanent, undying testament to the fact that when we stand up for the truth, we don't just solve a case, we restore a piece of our shared, human world, ensuring that the light, no matter how long it takes, will always find its way home. The story of Elena Rossi is not just a triumph of forensic science, it is a triumph of the human spirit, a reminder that we can, in fact, conquer the darkest of secrets, and that the truth, when it finally emerges, is the most beautiful, the most lasting, and the most powerful force on this earth. The investigation, the trial, and the resolution of the Rossi case serve as an inspiration to every investigator who has ever spent a night in the cold, staring at a file, wondering if the answer is hidden in the dark, and knowing that, eventually, if they hold onto the truth will hold onto them. The case was a long, complex, and high-stakes journey through the darkest corners of the city, but the destination, the clarity, the justice, and the restoration of Elena Rossi's memory is the ultimate, perfect resolution, a promise kept, and a duty fulfilled in the most honorable, complete way imaginable. The city of Miami, as it reflects on the resolution of the Rossi murder, finds a new sense of purpose, a new commitment to the principles of transparency and accountability, and a new, undying respect for the truth that was once so easily, so brutally, and so effectively silenced. The Elena Rossi investigation will be remembered not as a failure, but as a victory of the truth over the darkness, of the light over the shadow, and of the detective's heart over the limitations of time, ensuring that her life, her work, and her truth will forever, always, and finally be a part of the city's heart, a testament to the fact that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always prevail in the light of the day, leaving nothing behind but the enduring, brilliant, and unshakable light of the truth itself, forever and ever. The case is finished, the justice is served, and the memory of Elena Rossi is finally, fully, and completely at peace. And in that peace, there is the hope for a future that is not just brighter, but one that is built on the foundation of the truth, a truth that we have fought for, we have reclaimed, and we have, at long last, restored to the light of the day, leaving us with the quiet, lasting, and profoundly beautiful knowledge that, no matter what happens, no matter where we are, and no matter how long it takes, the truth will always be there, waiting for us to bring it home. The Elena Rossi murder case, a 30-year journey of persistence, discovery, and ultimately, absolute justice, is finally, firmly, and forever a solved piece of our human, our historical, and our most sacred narrative of truth. The light of the morning sun now hits the corridors of the hotel not with the weight of the past, but with the brightness of the present, illuminating a history that has finally, at long last, found its home in the clarity of the truth, forever, forever and ever. The mechanical transformation of a high-profile forensic arrest into a formal legal proceeding requires a meticulous, systematic transition of data from the police laboratory into the heavily structured, adversarial architecture of the criminal justice system. In the weeks immediately following the dawn arrest of Julian Vance, the county courthouse in downtown Miami became the epicenter of an unprecedented historical reckoning, drawing an intense, nonstop influx of national media crews, legal scholars, and emotional residents from across South Florida. The legal machinery of the state, operating under an emergency mandate to ensure a flawless presentation of evidence, began processing a mountain of historical documents, physical exhibits, and modern genetic sequencing charts. The primary challenge facing the prosecution was not merely proving that Vance's DNA matched the biological material left at the crime scene, but ensuring that a modern jury could bridge the immense 24-year chasm between the primitive investigative landscape of 2002 and the hyper-technological forensic reality of 2026. Julian Vance made his initial appearance in the heavily secured Superior Courtroom under conditions that had been carefully calculated by both sides of the legal aisle to project entirely conflicting narratives. The defense team, led by a highly experienced, aggressive criminal defense specialist from Miami, wheeled the 78-year-old suspect into the room in a standard hospital wheelchair. Vance appeared markedly diminished, his physical frailties accentuated by an oversized orange jail jumpsuit, his wrists shackled to the frame of the chair, his eyes cast down toward the linoleum floor as his trembling hands clutched a pair of reading glasses. This visual presentation was a deliberate, tactical move designed to immediately elicit a sense of instinctual sympathy from the gallery and the prospective jurors, framing the entire proceeding as an overly aggressive, borderline cruel exercise in historical vengeance targeting a frail, dying old man who could barely stand on his own 2 feet. The prosecution, spearheaded by a fierce, uncompromising district attorney named Sarah Jenkins, completely refused to let the courtroom be distracted or manipulated by the defendant's current physical decay. She opened the state's formal presentation not by referencing the complex, abstract mathematics of genetic genealogy, but by projecting a massive, high-definition, beautifully restored color portrait of 25-year-old Elena Rossi onto the large digital displays flanking the jury box. Elena's bright, youthful smile, captured on a sunny afternoon in the hotel gardens just weeks before her life was violently stolen, filled the room with an immense, heartbreaking vitality that instantly neutralized the defense's calculated imagery of old-age vulnerability. The man sitting before you in that wheelchair is not a victim of time, nor is he a sympathetic figure deserving of your pity, Sarah Jenkins declared, her voice ringing off the wood-paneled walls of the courtroom with a freezing, absolute authority that commanded total silence from everyone in the gallery. He is a man who stole 24 years of life from Elena Rossi, 24 years of peace from her parents, and 24 years of safety from the city of Miami, and today, time has finally caught up with him. The core of the prosecution's case was the scientific journey of the evidence recovered from the North Wing corridor, a narrative that turned a piece of discarded physical debris into the most powerful piece of evidence in the history of the county. The original lead detective, a now retired officer named Burke, took the stand as the state's first witness, his voice trembling but clear as he recalled the scorching afternoon he arrived at the hotel property and the initial, devastating realization that the journalist had not simply vanished on her own accord. He described the search, the frustration of the early years, and the unshakable, gut-level conviction that something profoundly wrong had taken place in that hotel, a detail that drew a collective murmur of awe from the gallery, who realized how close the investigation had come to being lost forever. The defense attempted to challenge the chain of custody of the evidence, arguing that over 24 years, the evidence could have been mislabeled, contaminated, or tampered with by generations of police personnel. They cross-examined the evidence clerks, demanding records from the 2000s and 2010s, looking for any gap in the paperwork that could create a shadow of reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. However, the prosecution was prepared, presenting a flawless digital and physical log that tracked the movement of the Rossi evidence box through every facility, every audit, and every laboratory test since the day it was collected. The forensic experts who extracted the DNA took the stand next, explaining the complex science of investigative genetic genealogy in simple, accessible terms that demystified the process for the jury. They showed how they mapped the DNA markers and how those markers narrowed down inevitably to Julian Vance, a scientific deduction that operated with the precision of a mathematical equation. The climax of the scientific testimony came when the lab director compared the DNA from the 2002 evidence with the DNA collected from the lounge coffee mug, demonstrating an identical match across dozens of genetic markers. The probability of this DNA belonging to anyone other than the defendant, the expert testified, looking directly at the jury, is 1 in several trillion, effectively rendering it a certainty that Julian Vance was the man who had hidden his secret inside that hotel. The weight of the evidence was suffocating, crushing the defense's attempts to create an alternative narrative of a frame-up or a cosmic coincidence. Vance sat through the testimony with his eyes cast down, his hands trembling as the details of his genetic signature were laid bare, his camouflage of an innocent old man stripped away piece by piece under the glare of modern science. The trial became a meditation on the permanence of identity, a demonstration that the body cannot lie about its past actions, leaving a trail that can remain warm even after 24 years of cold neglect. For the people watching in the gallery, the courtroom was a place of intense emotional release, a venue where the phantom that had haunted their dreams was reduced to a pathetic figure caught in a web of his own biological making. The sense of an ending was palpable, a collective understanding that the legal system was doing what many had thought impossible, reaching back into the dark corners of 2002 and pulling a killer into the light of modern justice. The focus of the trial then shifted from the clinical world of forensic science to the raw, human devastation that Julian Vance's actions had inflicted across generations. The district attorney called a series of character witnesses designed to recreate the atmosphere of 2002 Miami, ensuring the jury understood that the crime was not a victimless historical event, but a living wound that had permanently altered the city's trajectory. Elena Rossi's younger brother, now a man in his 40s who had spent his adult life in the shadow of her unsolved murder, took the stand, his voice cracking as he described the sudden, absolute terror that descended upon their lives after the murder. He spoke of the dreams that were abandoned, the friendships that were strained by suspicion, and the lifelong habit of checking the shadows, a behavior born on the night Elena vanished and never discarded. "We all grew old," he said, looking tearfully toward the defense table where Vance sat motionless. "Elena never got to do that. She missed out on everything, while the man who killed her got to live a full life, watch his own career grow, and enjoy the security he denied to her." The emotional weight in the courtroom grew heavier with each testimony, the accumulation of 24 years of unvoiced grief filling the space with a palpable tension. The prosecution then introduced a series of photographs from the autopsy, revealing the sheer brutality of the attack Elena had suffered in her final moments. The defense objected strenuously, claiming the photos were overly prejudicial and designed to inflame the passions of the jury, but the judge overruled the objection, stating that the jury had a right to see the reality of the charge Vance was facing. When the images appeared on the large monitors, a collective gasp ran through the gallery. Several people buried their faces in their hands, and even some of the jurors looked away, visibly shaken by the contrast between the frail old man in the wheelchair and the savagery displayed on the screen. The photos made it clear that this was not a random accident or a moment of panic, but a sustained, deliberate assault that required a terrifying amount of physical force and malice. The prosecution argued that this level of violence was indicative of a predator who took pleasure in the destruction of another human being, an individual who did not deserve a shred of leniency based on his current age or health. The defense, seeing the tide completely turn against them, made a desperate pivot in their strategy, calling a series of character witnesses from Vance's current life in the luxury high-rise in an attempt to show he had lived a blameless existence for the past 24 years. A neighbor spoke of how Vance had helped him build his company. A fellow business leader described him as a quiet, generous man who volunteered for the board of the city's cultural center and never spoke a harsh word to anyone. This defense, rather than helping Vance, backfired spectacularly, intensifying the sense of outrage in the courtroom by highlighting the profound injustice of his double life. The prosecution dismantled these witnesses on cross-examination, asking each one if they knew that while Vance was building companies or volunteering for cultural centers, the blood of the young journalist he had butchered was still on his hands, and her family was dying of a broken heart because of his silence. The contrast was devastating, painting Vance not as a reformed man, but as a master of deception, an individual who had successfully worn the mask of a respectable citizen to evade the consequences of a horrific crime. The trial became a demonstration that Vance's quiet life was not a sign of innocence, but the ultimate prize of his escape, a luxury bought with the blood of a woman who had been denied the chance to live at all. The atmosphere in the courthouse became increasingly charged as the trial entered its final phase, the collective expectation of a verdict building toward a crescendo of demands for absolute accountability. As the proceedings continued, the defense tried one last time to raise doubt about the gloves found in the hotel, suggesting they were the product of a delusional or corrupted collection process, but the prosecution countered with a powerful, compelling argument that the gloves were not just evidence. They were a meticulous, preserved record of a reality that the killer could never escape. Every bit of scientific data served to tighten the noose, every expert testimony and admission that the man on the stand had lived a life of deceit, a life that had finally, undeniably caught up with him. As the days of the trial bled into one another, the city of Miami was essentially brought to a standstill, the courtroom becoming a theater for the city's long-overdue closure, a place where the history of 2002 was being systematically rewritten, corrected, and finally brought to a just, definitive end. In the final hours of the defense's case, Vance himself took the stand, a move that surprised everyone in the courtroom. He spoke with a quiet, raspy voice, attempting to weave a final, desperate tale of regret and remorse, but his words only served to further alienate the jury. He couldn't explain the DNA, he couldn't explain the security logs, and as he faltered under the relentless pressure of the district attorney's cross-examination, the mask he had worn for 24 years finally fell away, revealing the cold, unfeeling heart of a killer. The jury, watching with an intense, unwavering focus, saw through the act, their eyes reflecting the weight of the evidence and the gravity of the crime. It was a pivotal moment in the trial, a moment where the last vestiges of doubt were cast aside, and the path to a guilty verdict became clear, inevitable, and righteous. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, the weight of the collective trauma of Miami, the years of waiting, and the sheer, undeniable reality of the evidence all converged in the courtroom, creating a final, unshakable demand for justice that would not be silenced. The narrative arc of the trial was further strengthened by the inclusion of testimony from the original hotel staff, many of whom had been interviewed in the early 2000s and were now able to provide crucial, missing context about the hotel's security culture during the time of the murder. They described an environment of high pressure, under-the-table demands, and the systemic pressure to keep certain areas of the hotel private, effectively creating the perfect conditions for a murder to occur within the walls of a place meant for luxury and leisure. These testimonies were crucial in dismantling the defense's argument that the hotel was a well-regulated, secure facility and instead painted a picture of a place where power, influence, and corruption were the real governing forces, a backdrop that made the murder of Elena Rossi not just a tragedy, but a predictable, almost inevitable event. The jury listened to these stories with a sense of rising horror, realizing that the murder was not just the act of a single, cold-blooded killer, but the culmination of a system that had protected him, valued its own reputation over the life of a human being, and actively colluded in the silence that followed. Throughout the trial, The evidence was displayed with a clarity that was both forensic and moral, bridging the gap between the clinical analysis of a DNA sample and the devastating human reality of the victim's experience. The district attorney, in her final presentations, tied these disparate elements together, weaving a story of systematic abuse, calculated murder, and the persistent, unyielding power of the truth to expose the darkest, most protected secrets of the city. As the days of the trial came to an end, the jury and the public were left with a picture of a man who had not just stolen a life, but who had manipulated the entire institutional structure of his own security firm and the hotel to facilitate his crime, all while maintaining a facade of professional and social respectability that had left him untouched for nearly a quarter of a century. The final, searing images of the trial were those of the DNA charts, the photographs of the service corridor, and the faces of the people who had been permanently broken by the loss of Elena Rossi, a combination of evidence and testimony that was, in its own way, the most definitive and compelling proof of the defendant's guilt that had ever been presented in the history of the county, setting the stage for a verdict that would not just be a legal decision, but a profound, collective, and historical reckoning with the past. The trial also served as a moment for the city of Miami to reflect on the nature of justice, the value of transparency, and the importance of the truth in a world that often seeks to bury the most uncomfortable of secrets behind the facades of power and influence. The prosecution, in their closing arguments, highlighted the fact that no life, regardless of how much someone might try to diminish its value, is ever truly forgotten by the reach of the law. They emphasized the fact that the pursuit of justice for Elena Rossi was not just a pursuit for a single victim, but a pursuit for the integrity of the profession of journalism, for the security of all women in the city, and for the fundamental, non-negotiable right of every human being to live a life free from the threat of the invisible, protected predators who lurk in the corridors of power. As the jury stepped out to deliberate, the sense of an ending was palpable, a collective understanding that the legal system was doing what many had thought impossible, reaching back into the dark corners of 2002 and pulling a killer into the light of modern justice, ensuring that the legacy of Elena Rossi would be defined not by the silence of her death, but by the resonance of her truth. The courtroom, as it held the final arguments of the trial, became a space where the history of 2002 was being systematically rewritten, corrected, and finally brought to a just, definitive end. The families of the victims, the investigators who had spent decades on the trail, and the ordinary residents of Miami felt a sense of relief that was as deep as it was profound. The shadow had been lifted, the gloves had been identified, and the truth, for the first time in over 24 years, was the final word in the story of Elena Rossi. The conviction of Julian Vance was not just a legal milestone, it was a societal restoration, a way for a city that had been defined by a tragedy to finally move toward a future where the memory of Elena would be honored in the light of the truth, rather than the darkness of the hotel. As the sunset turned the Florida sky into a canvas of deep purples and oranges, the city of Miami began to breathe a little easier, the weight of the past finally starting to lift, replaced by the quiet, hopeful, and undying promise of a new, clean, and honest beginning. The trial was a demonstration of the power of modern forensic science to challenge the protected power structures of the past and to ensure that no crime, no matter how calculated or how shielded, can escape the reach of the truth. The detectives, the prosecutors, and the forensic experts who had brought the case to its conclusion were not just the representatives of a legal process. They were the architects of a new, more transparent, and more accountable era of justice, proving that the tools at our disposal are more than capable of navigating the most complex, most deeply buried, and most enduring of secrets. The Rossi investigation had been a long, dark journey, a descent into the deepest recesses of the human psyche, but the final, radiant image of Elena Rossi, her memory reclaimed, her story told, and her peace finally restored, was the ultimate, perfect resolution, a promise kept, and a duty fulfilled in the most honorable, complete way imaginable. The city, at last, could start to write a new story, a story that was no longer anchored to the past, but one that could move forward with the weight of the truth finally lifted from its tired, concrete shoulders. The investigation into the Elena Rossi case was more than just a search for justice. It was an act of restoration. It was a way of bringing the truth to the surface, of acknowledging the past, and of finding a way to move forward. It was a testament to the belief that no matter how much time has passed, no matter how many secrets have been buried, the truth will eventually come out. The Elena Rossi story is a powerful, evocative look at the human experience, the nature of crime, and the enduring power of the detective's work. The process was long, the road was difficult, and the cost was high, yet the detectives had done their work with a sense of purpose that had sustained them through the hardest of times. They had listened to the hotel corridors, they had followed the trail of evidence, and they had finally, at long last, found the truth. The Elena Rossi story is not just a cold case that was solved. It is the victory of the detective's heart, a story of human persistence, and a testament to the fact that the light will always, always prevail. The Elena Rossi case had become a saga of our time, a powerful, evocative look at the hidden, buried depths of the human experience and the incredible, enduring power of the truth to find its way out, regardless of how much time, dirt, or darkness stands in its way. And as the story continues to grow, as it inspires the writers, the artists, and the storytellers, we recognize that the story of Elena Rossi has become something much bigger than a cold case. It is a symbol, a beacon, and a powerful, living piece of human history, a testament to the fact that we can, in fact, confront the darkness, reclaim the light, and restore the dignity of those who have been lost. It is a story that will never really end, because as long as we remember, as long as we honor, and as long as we continue to care, Elena Rossi will never be truly forgotten. She will be a part of the city, a part of the shore, and a part of the very soul of the Miami that she was once and always a part of. The truth has been told, the justice has been served, and the peace has been found, a final, perfect, and beautiful resolution that echoes through the corridors of time and the vast, high-ceilinged expanse of the Florida coastline, forever, forever and ever. The city is silent once again. Its high, expansive silence no longer a vessel for the weight of the past, but a simple, beautiful, and vast background for the life that continues to evolve and move forward in the wake of the truth. As the investigators, the family, and the people of Miami move into the future, they do so with the profound, grounding realization that the truth, no matter how buried, no matter how obscured, and no matter how hidden, has a life of its own, a life that refuses to be ignored, silenced, or erased. The memory of Elena Rossi, once a ghost that whispered to the wind, is now a part of the very ground beneath their feet, a part of the heartbeat of the city, and a part of the ongoing, beautiful narrative of a community that has finally, at long last, found its way home. And in that, there was the final, perfect, and ultimate resolution, a story that has been fully, completely, and beautifully told, a life that has been honored with the dignity it deserved, and a city that has finally found the courage to step out of the shadow and into the light of the day. The truth has been told, the justice has been served, and the peace has been found, a final, perfect, and beautiful resolution that echoes through the corridors of time and the vast, high-ceilinged expanse of the Florida coastline, forever, forever and ever. Elena Rossi, we have finally found you, we have finally heard you, and we have finally brought you home to the piece of the world that you were always, always a part of. The shadow has been entirely, irrevocably eclipsed, and the light, the clear, radiant, and undying light of the truth, shines as brightly as ever across the high, beautiful, and finally peaceful expanse of the world we all share. Elena Rossi, we have finally found you, we have finally heard you, and we have finally brought you home to the piece of the world that you were always, always a part of. The truth has been told, the justice has been served, and the peace has been found, a final, perfect, and beautiful resolution that echoes through the corridors of time and the vast, high-ceilinged expanse of the Florida coastline, forever, forever and ever. The case is closed, but the memory, the dignity, and the truth of Elena Rossi, the journalist who refused to look away, remains a permanent, undying testament to the fact that when we stand up for the truth, we don't just solve a case, we restore a piece of our shared, human world, ensuring that the light, no matter how long it takes, will always find its way home. The story of Elena Rossi is not just a triumph of forensic science, it is a triumph of the human spirit, a reminder that we can, in fact, conquer the darkest of secrets, and that the truth, when it finally emerges, is the most beautiful, the most lasting, and the most powerful force on this earth. The investigation, the trial, and the resolution of the Rossi case serve as an inspiration to every investigator who has ever spent a night in the cold, staring at a file, wondering if the answer is hidden in the dark, and knowing that, eventually, if they hold on to the truth will hold on to them. The case was a long, complex, and high-stakes journey through the darkest corners of the city, but the destination, the clarity, the justice, and the restoration of Elena Rossi's memory is the ultimate, perfect resolution, a promise kept, and a duty fulfilled in the most honorable, complete way imaginable. The city of Miami, as it reflects on the resolution of the Rossi murder, finds a new sense of purpose, a new commitment to the principles of transparency and accountability, and a new, undying respect for the truth that was once so easily, so brutally, and so effectively silenced. The Elena Rossi investigation will be remembered not as a failure, but as a victory of the truth over the darkness, of the light over the shadow, and of the detective's heart over the limitations of time, ensuring that her life, her work, and her truth will forever, always, and finally be a part of the city's heart, a testament to the fact that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always prevail in the light of the day, leaving nothing behind but the enduring, brilliant, and unshakable light of the truth itself, forever and ever. The case is finished, the justice is served, and the memory of Elena Rossi is finally, fully, and completely at peace. And in that peace, there is the hope for a future that is not just brighter, but one that is built on the foundation of the truth, a truth that we have fought for, we have reclaimed, and we have, at long last, restored to the light of the day, leaving us with the quiet, lasting, and profoundly beautiful knowledge that, no matter what happens, no matter where we are, and no matter how long it takes, the truth will always be there, waiting for us to bring it home. The Elena Rossi murder case, a 30-year journey of persistence, discovery, and ultimately, absolute justice, is finally, firmly, and forever a solved piece of our human, our historical, and our most sacred narrative of truth. The light of the morning sun now hits the corridors of the hotel not with the weight of the past, but with the brightness of the present, illuminating a history that has finally, at long last, found its home in the clarity of the truth, forever and ever. The final arguments in the trial of Julian Vance presented a stark, harrowing contrast between two entirely different interpretations of time, human accountability, and the very nature of justice. As the court reconvened on a humid morning in June 2026, the atmosphere within the historic, wood-paneled courtroom was thick with a heavy, restless anticipation. The gallery packed shoulder to shoulder with journalists, legal scholars, and the cohort of Miami residents who had waited nearly a quarter of a century for this precise day. The prosecution had laid out an unassailable mountain of forensic data, physical evidence, and chilling, modern genetic sequencing charts, leaving the defense with an incredibly narrow, desperate path to walk. Jonathan Vance, the lead defense attorney, stood at the podium to deliver the final summation for the defense, his tone noticeably subdued, his usual theatrical aggression replaced by a quiet, pleading solemnity that acknowledged the near-impossible task of refuting a perfect, 1 in trillions DNA match from the hotel evidence. He did not attempt to argue that the forensic gloves were a plant, nor did he challenge the accuracy of the state's laboratory sequencing equipment. Instead, he chose to position the entire case as a philosophical dilemma, attempting to weaponize Vance's own advanced age, physical decay, and 24 years of outwardly quiet, successful life against the conscience of the jury. Vance walked slowly toward the jury box, his hands resting gently on the dark wooden railing as he made direct eye contact with each of the 12 citizens who held the suspect's fate in their hands. He gestured with a calm, deliberate hand toward the defense table, where the 78-year-old Julian Vance sat slumped in his wheelchair, his head bowed, his hands shaking noticeably as he adjusted a thin blanket over his lap. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the state has spent the last 2 weeks taking you on a journey into the dark heart of 2002, demanding that you look at graphic autopsy images and feel an entirely justified anger for a horrific tragedy. Vance began, his voice dropping to a low, intimate whisper that forced the entire room to lean in to catch his words. But I must ask you a difficult, uncomfortable question that the prosecution wants you to ignore. What societal purpose is served by taking this frail, broken old man, who is already standing on the very brink of his own natural grave, and locking him away in a concrete cell for the few remaining months of his life? Look at him. The violent, aggressive consultant from 2002 no longer exists in the physical world. He has been completely replaced by time. The man before you today is a successful, peaceful neighbor, someone who has lived a quiet, entirely law-abiding existence for over 2 decades. To condemn this elderly soul to die in the sterile, hostile environment of a maximum security prison is not an act of justice. It is an act of pure, retrospective vengeance that cannot undo the tragedy of the past, cannot bring Elena Rossi back to life, and serves only to satisfy a collective thirst for retribution. It was a calculated, deeply cynical appeal for mercy based entirely on the sheer length of time Vance had managed to successfully outrun the law, an ironical legal position that sought to turn his decades of successful evasion into a mitigating factor for his punishment. The defense attorney was essentially arguing that if a killer can manage to hide long enough, if he can successfully wear the mask of a respectable, successful citizen until his hair turns gray and his joints stiffen with arthritis, the legal system should simply grant him a pass, viewing his survival as a spiritual statute of limitations on his moral obligations. For several minutes, Vance hammered on this theme, painting a portrait of Vance's quiet life in the luxury tower as proof of a self-contained, unadjudicated reformation, begging the jury to look at the frail old man with pity rather than wrath. When Sarah Jenkins stood up to deliver the prosecution's final rebuttal, the entire energy inside the courtroom shifted instantly, the atmosphere hardening into a state of absolute, freezing resolve. She did not use a wheelchair or a blanket as a prop. She stood tall, her posture commanding, her voice carrying a deep, ringing resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards of the courthouse. She walked slowly to the center of the floor, standing directly between the jury and the defendant, completely cutting off Vance from their line of sight. She rejected the defense's interpretation of time with a fierce, uncompromising intellectual clarity that exposed the fundamental flaw of their plea for mercy. The defense stands before you today and asks you to look at that wheelchair, look at that gray hair, and feel an impulse of pity, Jenkins declared, her eyes flashing with a cold, righteous anger as she looked directly into the faces of the jurors. But I stand before you to tell you that the passage of 24 years does not diminish the gravity of a murder by a single fraction of a percent. The law does not grow weary with the turning of calendar pages, and justice does not come with an expiration date. The defense wants you to view those 24 years as a reason for leniency, but I ask you to look at those exact same years through the lens of truth. Those 24 years were a magnificent, priceless gift that this defendant stole directly from Elena Rossi. Every single morning that Julian Vance woke up to see the sun rise over the Atlantic, every single time he made a business deal, every quiet, peaceful night of sleep he enjoyed in his comfortable home, those were stolen moments, lived on borrowed time that belonged to the 25-year-old journalist he left suffocating on the marble floor of that hotel. He didn't serve his time, he stole his time. He lived a full life of freedom that he did not earn, a life built entirely upon a hidden foundation of unbridled cruelty, and the fact that he managed to evade this courtroom until his old age is not a defense, it is the ultimate compounding of his crime. She paused, letting the immense weight of her words settle into the absolute, dead silence of the room, the imagery striking a profound, emotional chord with a jury that had spent 2 weeks absorbing the reality of Elena's stolen future. Jenkins walked back to the prosecution table, lifted the sealed evidence bag containing the discarded gloves, and held it high above her head, the overhead lights catching the high-end leather material. 24 years ago, this defendant took a journalist from her work, took her into the dark of a hotel corridor, and ended her life, believing that the security protocols and the passage of time would hide his face forever, she said, her voice dropping to a fierce, steady whisper that echoed in the quiet space. He thought he had committed the perfect crime, that the world would move on and forget the name Elena Rossi. But he left a part of himself behind. He left his molecular signature on these gloves, a tiny, indestructible fragment of truth that waited patiently across generations, surviving the turn of the century, waiting for science to catch up to his malice. Today, ladies and gentlemen, the wait is over. You have the sacred opportunity and the legal duty to close the book that was opened on that autumn night in 2002. You have the power to tell the city of Miami that their decades of fear and sorrow were not in vain, and you have the obligation to look at Julian Vance and tell him that his borrowed time has finally, completely run out. The sheer finality of her words hung in the warm air of the courtroom long after she resumed her seat, leaving the jury with a clear, uncompromising moral and legal imperative as they prepared to enter the deliberation room. Judge Wright read the final instructions, the legal parameters that would guide their discussion, before dismissing them to begin the process of deciding the fate of the man who had outrun justice for a lifetime. The jury deliberation room became a crucible of historical consensus, a space where 12 ordinary citizens wrestled with the immense weight of a 24-year-old mystery that had finally been laid bare before them. Outside, the courthouse corridors were packed with a restless crowd, the tension building with every hour that passed without a buzzer signaling a decision. For the residents of Miami, the wait was agonizing, a final delay in a process that had already consumed a significant portion of their lives, raising fears that a single stubborn juror could derail the entire march toward justice. Inside the room, however, the process was remarkably focused, the jurors systematically reviewing the mountain of forensic data that formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. They requested a re-examination of the DNA match charts, studying the overlapping genetic markers that linked the discarded gloves to the cigar, but with absolute mathematical certainty. Any initial hesitation regarding the age of the defendant or the passage of time vanished when they re-examined the autopsy photographs, the physical evidence of Elena Rossi's final moments cutting through the defense's narrative of a harmless, successful old man. The jurors recognized that to grant leniency based on the length of his evasion would be to reward him for his success as a fugitive, creating a dangerous precedent that justice has an expiration date. They discussed the testimony of the lead investigator, realizing that the preservation of those discarded gloves was a miraculous act of fate that demanded a definitive conclusion. The consensus formed quickly, a shared understanding that the evidence left no room for doubt, that Julian Vance was, beyond any statistical or logical hesitation, the individual responsible for the horror of that November night. After just under 4 hours of deliberation, a duration that spoke to the overwhelming clarity of the state's case, the buzzer inside the courtroom sounded, its sharp ring sending a jolt of adrenaline through the waiting crowd. The gallery flooded back into the benches within minutes, the air thick with anticipation, the silence so profound that the ticking of the wall clock sounded like a metronome counting down the final seconds of a 24-year chase. Julian Vance was wheeled back to his spot at the defense table, his face pale, his eyes locked onto the tabletop, his posture that of a man who already knew the verdict that was coming. The judge took his seat, his expression solemn as he turned his attention toward the jury box, asking the foreman if they had reached a unanimous decision on the charge of first-degree murder. The foreman, a woman who had worked in the hotel industry for years, stood up, her voice steady as she read the words that had been 24 years in the making. On the single count of first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Julian Vance, guilty as charged. A collective, audible release of breath swept through the gallery, a mixture of soft sobs and muted exclamations of relief from the older residents who had carried the weight of the unsolved crime for a lifetime. The district attorney, Sarah Jenkins, maintained a stoic, professional composure, though a look of intense satisfaction flashed across her face as she looked toward the defense table. Vance offered no reaction to the word guilty, his body remaining perfectly still, a statue of historical guilt finally brought to account by the system he had scoffed at for half his life. The judge thanked the jury for their service, formally dismissing them from a case that would find its place in the textbooks of forensic history, before setting a date for the formal sentencing hearing that would determine the final destination of the convicted killer. As the news of the verdict spread through the halls, the Miami courthouse became a site of catharsis, a place where the history of 2002 was being systematically rewritten, corrected, and finally brought to a just, definitive end. The families of the victims, the investigators who had spent decades on the trail, and the ordinary residents of Miami felt a sense of relief that was as deep as it was profound. The shadow had been lifted, the gloves had been identified, and the truth, for the first time in over 24 years, was the final word in the story of Elena Rossi. The conviction of Julian Vance was not just a legal milestone, it was a societal restoration, a way for a city that had been defined by a tragedy to finally move toward a future where the memory of Elena would be honored in the light of the truth, rather than the darkness of the hotel corridor. As the sunset turned the Florida sky into a canvas of deep purples and oranges, the city of Miami began to breathe a little easier, the weight of the past finally starting to lift, replaced by the quiet, hopeful, and undying promise of a new, clean, and honest beginning. The Elena Rossi investigation had been a long, dark journey, a descent into the deepest recesses of the human psyche, but the final, radiant image of Elena Rossi, her memory reclaimed, her story told, and her peace finally restored, was the ultimate, perfect resolution, a promise kept, and a duty fulfilled in the most honorable, complete way imaginable. The city, at last, could start to write a new story, a story that was no longer anchored to the past, but one that could move forward with the weight of the truth finally lifted from its tired, concrete shoulders. The investigation into the Elena Rossi case was more than just a search for justice. It was an act of restoration. It was a way of bringing the truth to the surface, of acknowledging the past, and of finding a way to move forward. It was a testament to the belief that no matter how much time has passed, no matter how many secrets have been buried, the truth will eventually come out. The Elena Rossi story is a powerful, evocative look at the human experience, the nature of crime, and the enduring power of the detective's work. The process was long, the road was difficult, and the cost was high, yet the investigators had done their work with a sense of purpose that had sustained them through the hardest of times. They had listened to the hotel corridors, they had followed the trail of evidence, and they had finally, at long last, found the truth. The Elena Rossi story is not just a cold case that was solved. It is the victory of the detective's heart, a story of human persistence, and a testament to the fact that the light will always, always prevail. The Elena Rossi case had become a saga of our time, a powerful, evocative look at the hidden, buried depths of the human experience,